We weren't allowed to be native. In 1924 is when we got our citizenships. 1978 is when we were allowed to practice our religion. So when we used to have our ceremonies, we used to have a guard out at the end of the driveway to the street.
Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar Khan, the host of Khanversations. Today we are going to talk about an injustice that our country has committed to the Native Americans who used to live here for centuries and for decades. The European colonial expansion and settlements in this country and on this continent, as America expanded from coast to coast, has done great harm to people who were here before us. But we're going to focus only today on the land that the University of Delaware occupies. The University of Delaware, most of its campuses are on land that belonged to Nanticoke and Lenni Lenape tribes that lived here before we pushed them far into the west, into Oklahoma. We're going to talk about the efforts made by people at the University of Delaware to acknowledge the harm done in the past and also to take steps to redress the injustices that have been committed in the past. We're going to talk about what is called as the Living Land Acknowledgement Initiative. We're going to talk with Professor Pascha Bueno-Hansen, who is a colleague in the Department of Political Science. She also teaches in the Gender and Women's Studies program, and she is part of this initiative at the University of Delaware. So before we start talking to her, I would like you to subscribe to Khanversations and also ring the bell icon so that when I post new videos, you get a reminder to come and watch Khanversations. So welcome to Khanversations, Professor Pascha Bueno-Hansen. I'm absolutely delighted that you're here to talk about this rather painful chapter from the history of the University of Delaware, whose faculty we both are.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here.
So first tell us what is going on. There was an announcement in November that there will be a land acknowledgement. And so what is this land acknowledgement? And it came as a shock to me that nearly every campus of University of Delaware is on colonized lands. So if you can share a bit more about that, my listeners will be.
Sure. Well, I think that I want to back up a little bit and give some context that over the past few years, there's been a growing national trend in the US to recognize the original peoples of the land on which you live and work. And the way to do this has been named through a land acknowledgement statement. And I'd also like to highlight that this effort is, very contemporary kind of emphasis that's come out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada that completed its final report in 2015. And really part of that was to kick up the level of national awareness of Indigenous peoples and their role historically and their current struggles and resistance to ongoing colonization. And so that has influenced in the US also through academic interchange and exchange what we now see as a growing trend in the US towards land acknowledgements. And I'll just say, what is the land acknowledgement? I would offer that, and this comes from Northwestern University in terms of defining it as a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of this land, whatever land you are on, right? And the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. So it's a statement of recognition and respect.
Does this recognition also recognize that the manner in which the land was appropriated was violent and that there were crimes and injustices committed, or it is just an acknowledgement that this land belongs to these original peoples and now we happen to be on it?
Well, every different group of people can develop a land acknowledgement however they see fit. And as part of the committee that's held within the University of Delaware Anti-Racism Initiative, we wanted to respond to this popular demand for land acknowledgement, recognizing that people were doing land acknowledgements in all kinds of different spaces in UD that were erroneous, that were not, they were undermining the goal of what they were trying to do with their best intentions. They were not consulting any local local indigenous people or leaders, and they were just sort of people have been putting things out there that may very much undermine their goal. So what we decided to do was undergo a process that has taken a long time, and it's not over. We call this a living land acknowledgement because the living piece says it's not a one and done. It is a process. This statement will shift and change over time as we learn and grow around the ongoing impact of settler colonialism and how it plays out in the Delaware Bay region. So I would like to share with you the land acknowledgement that we've created it's about a minute.
Sure.
And it's on a slide. And I think it will help to answer your question. In our case, we have been in consultation with tribal leadership in our region. We continue to consult, and our desire is not to just put something out there, but it's to create a relationship that intends to atone for these centuries of harm and be accountable to these, and look to how UD can engage in an ongoing process of reparations.
So I'm Dennis Coker, Principal Chief of the Lenape Indian Tribe of Delaware. I was really happy when I was contacted to really consult on this process and this effort, and because it's just an amazing tool that institutions can use to acknowledge the original people who were on the land where they currently exist. I was very, very happy to hear that they were going to include some action items. In order for us to heal as a society, I think we have to have those discussions. We got to get that baggage up on the table and talk about it, and finally put it to rest so that we can move forward as a people, a united people.
So now I'll share this with you. The University of Delaware occupies lands vital to the web of life for Lenni Lenape and Nanticoke, who share their ancestry, history, and future in this region. UD has financially benefited from this regional occupation, as well as from indigenous territories that were expropriated through the United States land grant system. European colonizers and later United States forced Nanticoke and Lenni Lenape westward and northward, where they formed nations in the present-day Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Ontario, Canada. Others never left their homelands or returned from exile when they could. We express our appreciation for ongoing Indigenous stewardship of the ecologies and traditions of this region. While the harms to Indigenous people and their homelands are beyond repair, we commit to building right relationships going forward by collaborating with tribal leadership on actionable institutional steps. And what I'd like to add at the end there, those words, actionable institutional steps. That is critical, because one of the biggest problems with the use of land acknowledgements is that they're just pretty words.
Yeah.
So many critiques highlight that it doesn't do anything except make people feel like they can pat themselves on the back for being good.
Hi, my name is Natasha Norman. I'm Chief of the Nanticoke Indian Tribe in Millsboro, Delaware. I believe that the land acknowledgement is very important to my people for the future generations to come. I know that our land may have been taken from us, but I don't believe that what was has to be for our future generations. I think that it's important that they see that others can collaborate with the tribe and that we can move forward in a good way, having a good relationship with those outside of the Native community and building future generations to come.
Reading an article critical of this, I think it was in the Atlantic, in which the author called it as moral exhibitionism. It is like saying that a thief robs you and then gives you a list of items that he stole and say, I acknowledge that I stole all of these items from you. I'm not obviously going to give it back to you, but I'm going to go and sell them and enjoy them. So can you tell us a little bit more about these actionable items that the university is planning, or at least your committee is recommending that the university pursue as something more substantive than just an oral or written acknowledgement that we thrive on occupied land?
Well, this is the key of it, Professor Khan, that we understand that the living land acknowledgement is inextricable from the institutional action steps. We cannot separate these things. And so the institutional action steps are the basis upon which a task force has been created under the Vice President of Institutional Equity, who has created this, and we are working on implementing these institutional action steps, which include, first and foremost, adoption of this living land acknowledgement formally by the university. And it includes also acknowledging that that the celebration of Thanksgiving is a colonial celebration, and that we should also acknowledge that there's a hidden story behind our United States celebration of Thanksgiving that is worth exposing. That we should also develop, I'm going to just cut quickly through the points. So that was number 2. Number 3 is that we should develop a UD ethics policy for working with Indigenous communities that's particular to harm reduction. We should support accessible counseling services to local tribal communities via third-party providers. We should, 5th, enhance dignity and self-determination through capacity building. And there's a number of things in there, including supporting Indigenous peoples' leadership development and supporting local tribal communities' support for reviewing technical reports that have to do with wildlife, water, soil, or air quality in terms of restoration of lands. Those are just 2 examples. You know, another area is, let me just finish these last points. Outreach, recruitment, and retention of Indigenous students, faculty, and staff. Encouragement of patronage of Indigenous-owned businesses and prioritizing UD contracts with Indigenous service providers. And lastly, to sponsor collaborative cultural programming. So this is the scope of these institutional action steps that we see as inextricable from the living land acknowledgement.
You know, while I was reading this, I was also a little bit shocked about the fact that we got 90,000 acres west of Mississippi, which we also sold and which contributed to University of Delaware's financial strength. But as I was reading it, my first reaction was, this is a no-brainer. The first thing in the action item should have been scholarships to all the Indigenous people who would like to come to study at University of Delaware, whether they are from Delaware or from other parts of the states where they have been relocated. And I discovered that there are only 16,000 Lenni Lenape people. And so it's not as if how many of them would be college going. The other thing that I realized is that we could also share the prosperity and the wealth that we have earned over these centuries through basically giving priority in hiring, not just as faculty, but whatever jobs people would like to. The university hires people in all areas. And one final thing I noticed that since 2017, they seem to be struggling to build a community center somewhere in the southern part of Delaware, and the university can, help them establish some kind of a museum or a cultural center right here at the University of Delaware. We have talked about it for more than a week now, and now for the last 10 days, I've been feeling very guilty. I've lived in Delaware for 17 years, at UD for 17 years, and I didn't know much about this. And as I walk around on campus, I actually look around to see if there are any signs, physical signs of acknowledgement that this belong to indigenous people. There's nothing, no markers, no statues. I wish that we would have a small museum about the Lenni Lenape people on campus.
Yeah, these are all such good points you bring up. And I want to focus in on the first one you made about the land grant system. And this is absolutely critical. As you know now, and many people do not know, that in 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Morrill Act, which distributed public domain lands to raise funds for fledgling colleges across the nation. And I really, really strongly encourage people to look up High Country News and to look up the amazing work they're doing with regard to the land grant system. And as you rightly stated, in 1867, the state of Delaware selected University of Delaware as a land grant institution, and the federal government granted UD 90,000 acres west of the Mississippi. And over those next 5 years, UD sold those lands, benefiting from the removal of nearly 70 modern-day tribes, bands, and Native nations. So we are absolutely and directly profiting from the expropriation of lands and the displacement of many indigenous tribes, bands, and Native nations. The trick, Professor Khan, is that the research has not been done to lay this out in plain sight. And the UD Anti-Racism Initiative has funded a graduate student that we have been working with to do all this research. We are in the process of preparing a UD land grab history document, which we will present next academic year, that lays in plain sight how all of this has occurred, in order to then make the exact arguments that you make. That, and this is not just UD, this is a systematic process across this country. So in terms of reparations, we're looking at being part of a national initiative of universities across the country that want to come together to address this hideous violence and what it could take to make across the board free tuition and scholarships for boarding and for food and tuition's one piece, all the rest of the pieces, and very intensive scaffolding for the support of the success of the Indigenous and Native American students that would be able to benefit from such a program. Because, of course, what we're talking about is a completely different context that is unknown and unsupportive, right? Coming to the university is going to be something that needs lots of supportive mechanisms in place. So all of this is within our sights. And I'm really glad that you brought up that point. I think that's the most significant second step that we are taking at UD.
Lots of people think that Canada is way ahead on this issue. And so I was Googling a little bit of what's going on in Canada. And while I do see that they have started this movement of acknowledgement, I also discovered the disappearance of Native American women seems to be very common, and trafficking going on. And I realized that there seems to be some kind of a disconnect. While there are people who are acknowledging injustices done in the past, there's very little effort made to prevent injustices in the present also, right? So I think one of the things that perhaps the University of Delaware is disproportionately big and influential compared to our state. I don't think that any other state level university is as big compared to the size of their state, right? So we could do a lot here in terms of addressing social justice issues and also some of the issues which have led to both cultural, political, and economic marginalization of the Lenape people, as well as the related tribes like Nanticoke, etc. I also wanted to see if you could tell us a little bit about your academic interests also seem to converge with this, right? Your book on transitional justice. What is transitional justice? Is this what we are doing right now?
I think we are engaging in what you could loosely call transitional justice, which is both a scholarly field and a set of mechanisms and practices to address mass human rights violations that usually occur in contexts of political violence and repression, in contexts of internal armed conflict and authoritarian regimes, but not always, right? So, we aren't in an internal armed conflict or authoritarian regime context, but we are looking at ongoing human rights violations, right, historically. So within that context, there's, a basket of different types of mechanisms and practices and protocols that can be put into place. And that's, I think, the model that Canada used. And of course, as you rightly mentioned, this is not a gender neutral issue. Women's bodies are also seen as the part of the lands to be conquest that are under conquest. The conquest of the land and the conquest of women's bodies go hand in hand. The destruction of women's bodies and the domination of the land go hand in hand. And that is something that has a direct and continuous manifestation from colonial contact to the present that has not changed, as the commission in Canada shows, that the violence against Indigenous women has never stopped.
One of the issues with discussing these kinds of past injustices, and these things come up in discussions about reparations for slavery, etc., the legal liability side of it. So the people in positions of authority are reluctant to acknowledge harm done because they fear that they might be sued for reparations, etc. So this is my last question. Is the university administration on board, or once you get all of these in place, is it going to be a struggle to get the administration to do what they have to do?
Well, that will have to be seen. I mean, I can say, as anyone can say, that these types of initiatives are a struggle. They are part of an ongoing struggle of centuries. So clearly, I don't think that the doors will open and the coffers will flow. It goes counter to the logic of an academic institution that's based on profit. But I do think that because there is a popular mandate, because we have an overwhelming message from the undergraduates, the graduates, and the faculty, we have a national trend and tide to address these issues. University of Delaware will have to respond to this historical moment.
Professor Pascha Bueno-Hansen, thank you very much for coming on Khanversations and talking to me. But I also want to especially thank you for this incredible job that you're trying to do. I can also recognize that it must be emotionally also taxing to people who are researching this and struggling for it. So I salute you for your work, and please count me as an ally. And I hope that the University of Delaware will do the best that it can to redress what little of the injustices that we have committed in the past, so that at least going into the future, we are able to bring in people who have been marginalized, disenfranchised, and robbed and colonized in the past. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I know I don't have to tell you this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Please subscribe to Khanversations and make sure that you ring the bell icon so that you get notifications of all new videos. Thank you.